It began on a rainy night. Daniel Harris, a 32-year-old salesman, was driving back from a long and exhausting business trip. His GPS told him the highway motel he had booked online was just a few minutes away. Fatigue pulled at his eyelids, and the storm made visibility almost impossible. When he finally saw the flickering neon sign Haven in relief washed over him, the lobby looked ordinary enough. A single desk lamp cast a yellow glow, and behind the counter sat a woman with sharp eyes and a forced smile. She wore a faded uniform that seemed one size too big, and her name tag was scratched, unreadable. "Reservation for Daniel Harris," he said, placing his ID on the counter. She checked a dusty ledger, not a computer, and handed him an old-fashioned brass key with a wooden tag. "Room 6. Down the hall. Last door on the left," she said in a flat tone. Daniel thanked her, grabbed his bag, and walked toward the hallway. The inn was eerily quiet. The carpet was threadbare, the wallpaper peeling. With each step, the floorboards groaned as if protesting his presence. At the end of the corridor, he found the door marked 6. The brass number was tarnished, barely visible. He inserted the key, and the door unlocked with a sound that was far too loud for such a small building. Inside, the air was heavy, almost damp. The smell of mildew mixed with something faintly metallic. The curtains were torn, the furniture out of place, and the mirror across from the bed seemed strangely out of alignment, tilted at an unnatural angle. He placed his suitcase on the dresser. That's when he noticed something strange. His reflection in the mirror didn't look right. His body appeared. Yes, but his face was blurred, like fog had smeared it out. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. His reflection smiled. Even though he hadn't, chills crawled up his spine. He turned away quickly, telling himself it was exhaustion playing tricks. He needed sleep. He lay down on the bed, but the mattress sagged as though someone else was already lying there. The air turned colder, and faint whispers seemed to seep from the walls. "Ignore it. Just sleep," he thought. But every time he closed his eyes, he heard a soft knock-tap. Tap-tap coming from inside the closet. At 3:07 a.m., Daniel sat upright, sweating. He couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed his phone and flashlight, deciding to go back to the reception desk. When he opened the door to the hallway, he froze. The corridor was different. Longer. Darker. He could swear there had only been 5 rooms, yet now the whole stretched endlessly into shadows. The wallpaper was darker, almost black, with stains that looked disturbingly like handprints. Heart-pounding, he hurried back the way he thought he came, but the front desk was gone. Only more hallway, more doors. He rushed back to room 6, desperate for a familiar landmark. But when he returned, the door was gone. In its place was a solid wall. His pulse raced. The key in his hand burned cold, heavier than before. He felt as though the walls themselves were closing in. Somewhere down the hall, a door creaked open slowly. He couldn't see inside, but he felt eyes watching him. And then, behind him, the mirror from room 6 was suddenly there freestanding in the hallway. It surfaced rippling like liquid. His own reflection stood inside it, smiling wider and wider, until its mouth tore unnaturally across its cheeks. Daniel stumbled backward, dropping the key. The reflection whispered, though its lips didn't move, "You shouldn't have checked in." Darkness consumed the hallway. The rain had been falling for hours. Each drop lashed against Daniel Harris's windshield like tiny needles, and the wipers squeaking back and forth struggled to clear the water fast enough. The highway was nearly empty, save for the occasional pair of headlights sweeping past in the opposite lane. Fatigue was pressing down on him heavily, his head nodding every few minutes, his muscles aching from hours behind the wheel. He kept telling himself he just needed to reach the motel he had booked online, get a few hours of rest, and tomorrow everything would feel lighter. The glowing screen of his GPS told him the place was close less than 5 minutes away. When the flickering neon sign finally appeared through the sheets of rain, Daniel felt a wave of relief. The words Haven embossed weakly in faded red and blue lights. Some of the letters were broken, so it read more like HV and I in the building. Itself looked small, no more than 2 stories, with chipped paint on its wooden exterior. But to Daniel, at that moment, it looked like paradise. He pulled into the gravel parking lot. Puddles reflected the glow of the neon sign, distorting it in broken ripples as raindrops kept falling. He switched off the engine. The sudden silence of the car was overwhelming, filled only by the relentless drumming of rain on the roof. Daniel grabbed his overnight bag and jogged toward the entrance. The glass doors squealed when he pushed them open, and a small brass bell above the frame jingled softly. The sound was oddly delicate, like something from another time. Inside, the lobby was dimly lit by a single desk lamp. Shadows clung to the corners of the room. An old sofa sat against the wall, its fabric torn in places, the stuffing poking out. A clock hung behind the counter, its hands ticking unevenly, almost stuttering, as if even time didn't work properly here. Behind the counter was a woman. Her face was pale, her hair pulled tightly into a bun. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, which were sharp, watching him with an intensity that made him feel both acknowledged and trapped. Her namatag was scratched so badly that the letters were unreadable. "Reservation for Daniel Harris," he said, placing his ID on the counter. She slid open a large, dust-covered ledger, not a computer, not even a phone. The pages were yellowed, edges frayed. She ran her finger down the lines until she stopped, nodded once, and reached below the counter. When her hand emerged, she was holding a brass key. The key was heavy-looking, attached to a block of wood with the number 6 carved into it. She placed it on the counter carefully, almost reverently. "Room 6, she said in a flat voice. Her words had no rise or fall, no warmth, like a recording played through an old speaker. Down the hall, last door on the left. Daniel forced a smile and nodded, though a chill prickled at the back of his neck. He picked up the key, its coldness biting into his palm, and turned toward the hallway. The corridor stretched ahead of him, carpet worn so thin in places that the floorboards showed through. The wallpaper, once patterned with cheerful flowers, was now peeling, stained with damp marks that spread like veins. The ceiling light flickered, buzzing faintly as he walked. The old floorboards groaned under his weight, long, drawn-out creaks that echoed behind him. He glanced back once, half expecting to see the receptionist still watching, but the lobby was now empty. Even the lamp seemed dimmer. At the very end of the hall was his door, room 6. The number on the brass plate was tarnished and greenish, as though time itself had eaten into the metal. The key slid into the lock with resistance, and when he turned it, the sound of the bolt sliding back was loud, too loud, like iron scraping against stone. The door opened with a sigh, as though the room itself exhaled after years of silence. The first thing Daniel noticed was the smell. Dampness, mildew, and something faintly metallic, like rust or blood. The air felt heavy, pressing against his skin. The room looked wrong. The curtains were torn and half-hanging, swaying slightly even though the window was shut. The bed sagged in the middle, its sheets wrinkled as if someone had just risen from it. The dresser was crooked, one drawer half open, and across from the bed stood a tall mirror in a warped wooden frame. Daniel froze. His reflection was there, but something was off. The face staring back at him wasn't clear. It looked blurred, smudged, as though fogged glass separated him from himself. He raised a hand cautiously. His reflection followed, but then, just for a second, it smiled. He hadn't. A cold shiver traced his spine. He rubbed his eyes, blinked hard, and looked again. This time, his reflection seemed normal. Still, the unease lingered. He placed his suitcase on the dresser and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped sharply, as though someone else's weight was already there. The air felt colder here, like an unseen draft slipped through the walls. Silence filled the room, but not the comfortable kind. It was the silence of a place that was listening. Daniel tried to shake the feeling, lying back, telling himself he was just exhausted. But every time he closed his eyes, he heard it tap, tap. A soft knocking. It came from the closet. At first, he told himself it was just the pipes or the building settling. But the sound continued, slow and deliberate, like knuckles against wood. He turned on his side, staring at the closet door. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness peering out at him. The knocking stopped. He held his breath. Minutes passed. Eventually, exhaustion won, and he drifted into a restless sleep. When he woke, his phone screen told him the time. 3:07 a.m. He sat upright instantly, his chest tight with dread. The air was icy cold now, so cold he could see his breath fog in the faint glow from the streetlight outside. And then the knocking started again. Tap, 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 tap. Slow, patient. He scrambled out of bed, grabbing his phone as a flashlight. He moved toward the door, determined to go back to the lobby. The hallway would feel safer than this. He twisted the doorknob and stepped out, but the corridor wasn't the same. It stretched longer than before, impossibly long, lined with door after door. The wallpaper here was darker, almost black, with stains shaped like smeared handprints. The light bulbs overhead flickered, casting long, jerking shadows. Panic surged through him. He turned back toward the lobby, but the front desk was gone. Just more hallway, more doors. He hurried back to where room 6 should have been, but when he looked at the wall, nothing but blank, peeling wallpaper. The key in his hand grew heavier, freezing cold, biting into his skin. Somewhere down the hall, a door creaked open with agonizing slowness. Darkness yawned within, and though Daniel couldn't see anyone inside, he felt it. The weight of eyes watching him. And then he froze. The mirror, the same warped mirror from room 6, now stood at the far end of the hallway, standing upright without support. Its surface rippled like water. His reflection was inside it, waiting. Only this time, it wasn't a reflection. It was standing still, smiling wider than any human should be able to. Its grin tore unnaturally across its face, stretching almost ear to ear. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The figure inside the mirror leaned forward, pressing its hands against the glass. Its lips didn't move, but the words crawled into his mind. "You shouldn't have checked in." And then the hallway lights went out. Darkness swallowed everything. For a few terrible seconds, Daniel couldn't see his own hands in front of him. The silence pressed against his ears until he could hear only the frantic pounding of his heart. His flashlight app refused to turn on, his phone screen frozen and lifeless despite being charged. And then, faintly, came the sound of breathing. Not his own. This was deeper, heavier, like something massive exhaled in the dark. It came from everywhere at once, as though the entire hallway itself was alive. A light flickered at the far end. The mirror glowed faintly, the warped surface pulsing like liquid metal. His reflectioner, whatever it was, stood there, motionless. Its grin was still impossibly wide, its head tilted at an angle that looked painful. Daniel's legs felt locked in place, but his instincts screamed at him to move. Slowly, carefully, he stepped backward. The floorboards creaked, echoing down the endless corridor. The reflection moved to mirroring his steps, but a beat slower, almost lagging behind, as though it was watching him with amusement. "Stop this," Daniel whispered under his breath, though his voice cracked. "This isn't real. I'm just tired. I need to wake up." But the air told him otherwise. He could feel it. This place was aware of him. The heavy breathing stopped. Silence fell again, and then, from one of the many doors along the hallway, came a noise. Click. The sound of a lock turning. Daniel spun, searching the rows of identical doors. One was opening slowly, hinges squealing in protest. Beyond it lay a sliver of darkness, Too thick to be natural, he gripped the brass key tighter in his hand, the woodblock digging into his palm. Maybe, he thought, if he could just find his door again, he could make this nightmare end. He pressed his hand against the wallpaper where room 6 should have been. It felt strangely soft, almost spongy, like skin. He jerked his hand back, bile rising in his throat. The mirror pulsed again. He dared to glance at it. His reflection wasn't alone anymore. Figures stood behind it, blurry, faceless shapes. They leaned closer, pressing against the inside of the glass. One lifted a hand, dragging its fingers down the mirror's surface. Long, dark streaks followed, as though the glass bled. Daniel's breath hitched. His body screamed at him to run. He bolted down the hallway, shoes thudding against the warped carpet, not caring where he was, going just away. The corridor stretched endlessly, doors on either side blurring as he passed. But no matter how far he ran, the buzzing neon light above him never dimmed. It was like running on a treadmill inside a nightmare. He stopped, finally, doubled over, gasping for air. The silence was worse than the running, and then he heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. The knocking, it came from the door nearest him. The number on the plaque was scratched beyond recognition. The knocking grew louder, more insistento, as though whatever was inside knew he was standing there. Daniel staggered back, shaking his head. No, I'm not opening that. The knocking stopped, and then, very slowly, the doorknob began to turn on its own. Daniel froze. His throat went dry. The knob rattled, twisted, then snapped back into place with a sharp, metallic click. The silence afterward was unbearable, as though the entire hallway held its breath. He turned away, trembling. That was when he saw it. At the end of the corridor, just barely visible in the half-light, stood the receptionist, the same woman who had given him the key. She was facing him, her hands folded neatly in front of her, but something was wrong. Her head was tilted to one side far too far, like her neck had broken. Her face was expressionless, but her eyes gleamed with something unnatural. "Sir," she said softly, her voice echoed, carrying down the hall in a way that made the walls vibrate. "You shouldn't be here." Daniel stumbled backward. I checked in. "You gave me the key. I just want to leave." The receptionist's mouth twitched. For the first time, her lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't human. It stretched too wide, pulling at the corners of her cheeks. Her teeth were small, sharp, perfectly even, like rows of needles. Behind her, doors began to open one by one, slowly, patiently. Black gaps yawned open, revealing nothing but darkness within. From that darkness, whispers spilled into the corridor, low and indistinct, like dozens of voices speaking all at once. Daniel clutched the key tighter, shaking. He had the sudden, irrational thought that as long as he held it, he might still belong to himself. Without it, the inn would claim him entirely. The receptionist took a step closer. The floor didn't creak under her weight. She made no sound at all. Daniel turned and ran again, blindly this time, tears blurring his vision. He slammed into walls, stumbled, nearly fell, but kept going. Suddenly he saw it. A staircase, narrow, steep, leading down into what looked like the lobby. Relief burst inside his chest. He charged down the steps 2 at a time, his breath ragged. The glow of the desk lamp shone below. Golden and warm. Normal. Safe. He reached the bottom and nearly collapsed, gripping the counter for support. The ledger was still there. The lamp still burned. The air here felt less suffocating, but when he looked up, the desk was empty. The receptionist was gone, and in her place sat the mirror. It leaned casually against the counter, as though it had always belonged there. His reflection smiled back at him, the same impossibly wide grin. Behind it, the faceless shapes pressed closer, their outlines clearer now. One of them raised its hand and tapped the inside of the mirror. Tap, tap, tap. The same knock from the closet, the same knock from the door. This time, the sound came from everywhere at once. The floor, the walls, the air itself. The mirror pulsed, its surface rippling outward. His reflection extended a hand, pressing it against the glass. The shapes behind it crowded closer, their whispers growing louder. Daniel, a dozen voices breathed in unison. Your hours now. The glass began to crack. The mirror cracked with a sound like ice splitting on a frozen lake. Thin fractures spidered across the glass, glowing faintly in the dim lobby light. Each crack pulsed, as though something beneath the surface was alive and trying to push through. Daniel stumbled backward, his shoulder slamming into the wall. His breath came in short, shallow bursts. Every nerve in his body screamed to run, but his legs felt like lead, rooted to the carpet. The brass key slipped from his trembling fingers, clattering onto the floor with a hollow sound. The whispers swelled. They weren't voices anymore. They were a tide. Words in languages he didn't know. Syllables twisting into something low and guttural. His skin prickled as though invisible fingers brushed over him. He squeezed his eyes shut. This isn't real. I'm still asleep. I'm still in my car. I'm still. Something cold grazed his hand. His eyes flew open. A pale, translucent hand had emerged from the cracked mirror, its fingers long and bony. The nails were black, tapering 2 points. The hand pressed against the floor, anchoring itself, while another hand pushed through beside it. Daniel lurched away, his back hitting the counter hard. The mirror bulged outward, its surface stretching like a membrane. A head pressed through a face, blurred like wet paint, features rearranging themselves constantly. It opened its mouth, and a low groan rolled out, deep enough to vibrate the floorboards. Daniel reached for the key instinctively, but it was gone. Only an impression remained on the carpet where it had fallen, as though the wood itself had absorbed it. His heart plummeted. You shouldn't have checked in, whispered a dozen voices in unison, echoing through the room. The sounds didn't come from the mirror anymore. It came from inside him, curling around his ribs like smoke. He bolted for the door, the glass entrance that led back to the rain-soaked parking lot. His shoes squealed on the warped carpet as he sprinted. He grabbed the handle and yanked. It didn't budge. He pulled harder, slamming his shoulder against it, but it was as solid as a wall. He pressed his forehead against the glass. Outside, the parking lot was still there but wrong. The puddles reflected no neon sign. No car, no rain, just blackness, as though the world ended a few feet beyond the doors. He could see nothing but void. Behind him, the thing from the mirror kept crawling through. Its head was fully out now, its body bending unnaturally, joints rotating in ways no humans could. Its smile was too wide, its eyes two deep hollows. Its hands reached for the floor, dragging the rest of its body forward. The other shapes behind it pressed closer to the cracking glass, dozens of them, their forms merging and splitting like shadows underwater. Daniel spun, desperate. The only way left was the hallway again. He ran, not daring to look back, the sound of scraping nails following him. The corridor stretched ahead, dimmer than before, lined with doors that seemed to breathe, each door expanding and contracting as though inhaling. He passed room 2, room 3, room 4. The numbers were wrong, flickering between digits, rearranging themselves like a broken slot machine. The carpet under his feet grew wet, each step making a sickening squelch. When he looked down, his footprints were black, leaving a trail behind him. The knocking returned. Tap! 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 This time, every door on either side knocked at once, perfectly in sync. Daniel clamped his hands over his ears, but it didn't matter. The sound was inside his skull. He ran faster, gasping for air, until he reached another set of stairs, these leading up. Without thinking, he took them 2 at a time. The stairs twisted and doubled back on themselves, an impossible geometry that made him dizzy. The walls here were darker, the air colder. He heard whispers just behind his neck, words he couldn't make out. Something brushed his shoulder, but when he spun, no one was there. At the top of the stairs was a single door. It was plain. No number, no handle, just wood. A faint light seeped from the cracks around it. He pressed his palm to it. It felt warm, almost alive, and for a second, he thought he heard a heartbeat pulsing behind it. He pushed. The door swung open silently. He stepped into a room that shouldn't exist. It was enormous, far larger than the inn could possibly contain. A ballroom of sorts, with a black and white checkered floor that stretched endlessly in all directions. Chandeliers hung above, their crystals covered in cobwebs, swaying as though moved by a wind he couldn't feel. The walls were mirrors, floor to ceiling, reflecting him from every angle. But in each reflection, he was slightly different, older, younger, bloodied, grinning, weeping. Hundreds of Daniels stared back at him, some pounding on the inside of the glass. In the center of the room stood a desk, the same front desk from the lobby, the same ledger, the same lamp, glowing faintly, and behind it the receptionist, her head still tilted at that impossible angle, her smile frozen. Her eyes followed him as he stepped closer. "Checkout time," she said softly. Her voice echoed from every reflection, overlapping, harmonizing with itself until it became a chorus. "Do you have your key?" Daniel's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He shook his head slowly. He had lost it. The receptionist's smile widened, splitting the corners of her cheeks until blood trickled down her jaw. "No key," she whispered. "No exit." He backed away. His reflections moved differently now, not mirroring him at all. Some lunged at the glass, slamming their fists against it. Others beckoned with crooked fingers. One of them, his own face, smiled and raised a brass key, dangling it from its fingers like bait. Daniel's heart pounded. He realized suddenly, with sick clarity, that the key had never been to the room. It had been to him. It was the only thing anchoring him to himself, and now it was gone. The mirror world Daniels began to chant softly, their voices weaving together with the whispers from the doors. "Room 6, they said. Room 6. Room 6. The chandeliers above shuddered. The black squares on the floor began to spread, swallowing the white squares until the entire ground beneath him was an abyss. The receptionist leaned forward, her arms stretching far longer than they should, reaching across the desk toward him. Her fingers brushed his shirt. He jerked back, but there was nowhere to run. Every direction was reflection. "Room 6 doesn't exist," she breathed. "But you do, for now." The floor gave way beneath him. He fell, weightless, spinning through darkness, the whispers becoming screams. Faces flashed around him, his own. Strangers, faceless shapes. The last thing he saw before everything went black was the mirror shattering above, the pieces raining down like knives, and then silent. Daniel landed hard. The impact drove the air from his lungs, and for a moment he lay sprawled on a cold surface, gasping, his chest aching. He blinked against the blackness, waiting for his eyes to adjust. Gradually, a dim glow appeared, not from any visible light source, but seeping from the walls themselves, as though the darkness wanted him to see just enough to despair. He pushed himself up, palms scraping against rough stone. He wasn't in the ballroom anymore. He was in a corridor, another one, but this one was worse. The walls were damped, glistening as though sweat poured from them. The ceiling was low, pipes jutting out, dripping rusty water that splattered onto the floor. The air smelled of rot and iron, heavy and suffocating, and the corridor stretched both ways into infinity. Daniel staggered to his feet, his ears still ringing from the fall. Somewhere distant, faint but growing, came the echo of footsteps, slow, deliberate, not his own. He turned left, then right, unsure which way to go. Both directions looked identical. His pulse hammered, panic threatening to take control. He pressed his back against the wall, closing his eyes, forcing himself to breathe. One thought cut through the terror. Move. Don't stay still. He chose a direction and walked, each step echoing unnaturally loud. The footsteps behind him grew louder too, matching his pace. When he stopped, they stopped. His throat tightened. He didn't dare look back. The corridor twisted suddenly, turning sharp corners, leading him deeper into a labyrinth that shouldn't exist. He passed doors rusted, dented metal doors with no handles. Some vibrated faintly, as though something inside was pressing against them. From one came a scraping sound, from another, a low, muffled moan. Daniel quickened his pace, muttering to himself, "Not real, not real, not real." But the air grew colder the further he went, and the smell stronger: blood, sweat, mold. At last, he stumbled into a wider chamber. The ceiling here rose high above him, lost in shadow. In the center of the chamber stood a chair, a single wooden chair, lit by a cone of dim yellow light that seemed to come from nowhere. On the chair lay the brass key. Daniel's breath caught. He rushed forward, almost falling to his knees. He grabbed the key with trembling hands, clutching it to his chest like a lifeline. Relief surged through him, hot, dizzying relief. But then he heard it, a laugh. Soft at first, then growing louder. It didn't echo from one place, it came from everywhere. The walls, the floor, the ceiling. High-pitched, low-pitched, dozens of voices laughing all at once, weaving together into a chorus of madness. The light above the chair flickered, and for the briefest second, Daniel saw that it wasn't empty before he had arrived. A figure had been sitting there all along, thin, skeletal, its hollow eyes fixed on him, and it was still there now, standing just outside the light, watching. Daniel staggered back, clutching the key. His hands shook so violently he nearly dropped it again. The laughter stopped. Silence pressed in. From the darkness, a voice whispered, "Now you belong." The walls of the chamber began to shift. The bricks oozed like wax, reshaping themselves. A door appeared in the far wall, wooden, crooked, its frame pulsating as though it were breathing. Daniel stared at it, then down at the key in his hand. It was the same one he had been given at the front desk, only now it felt heavier, warmer, as though it pulsed with his heartbeat. The door creaked open a fraction, revealing only blackness within. A foul wind gusted out, carrying with it a stench of decay so strong it nearly dropped him to his knees. And then he heard his own voice, Daniel. He froze. The voice was unmistakable. It was him from inside the room. "Daniel," it repeated, "don't leave me here. Please." His stomach churned. He stumbled forward, peering into the gap. His reflection stared back at him from within the darkness, not blurred, not distorted him. Exactly. Same face, same clothes, but his double looked terrified, hands pressed against the inside of the doorway as though it were glass. "They want me," the double said, tears streaming down his cheeks. "They'll take me if you go. Don't let me stay here." Daniel shook his head, muttering, "No, no, this isn't real." The double pounded on the invisible barrier. "Please, I'm you. You're me. You can't just walk away." The brass key grew hot in Daniel's palm, burning. He cried out, dropping it, but instead of clattering to the ground, it vanished, mirror dissolving into black smoke that seeped into the cracks of the door. The door swung wider. His double screamed. Hands shot out of the darkness, hundreds of them. Pale, clawing hands that seized the double, dragging him backward. He kicked, clawed, screamed Daniel's name, but in seconds he was gone, swallowed into the void. The door slammed shut. Daniel collapsed, sobbing, clutching his head. The air was thick with whispers again. They weren't angry now. They were pleased, sated. He lifted his head slowly. The chamber was gone, the chair, the light, the door gone. sheets, the curtains torn, the mirror across from him, his suitcase still on the dresser. Had it all been a dream? But when he looked into the mirror, his reflection wasn't lying down. It was standing, watching, smiling. Daniel's throat tightened as he stared at the mirror. His reflection should have been mimicking his every move, but instead it stood motionless, towering above him with an unnatural stillness. Its eyes were locked on him, unblinking, its smile spreading wider, so wide that the corners of its mouth split and bled. He scrambled out of bed, nearly tripping over his own bag. His hands shook as he pointed at the glass, as if scolding it like a child. "Stop. Just stop." His voice cracked, weak and pitiful in the suffocating silence. The reflection tilted its head slowly, like a predator studying prey. Then it raised its hand. Not a wave. Not a mimic. It reached forward, pressing its palm against the inside of the glass. Danielu Frozu. His chest rose and fell in panicked bursts. He felt a strange pressure, as though something invisible pressed against his own chest in response. Then came the sound. Tap, tap, tap. The same rhythm he had heard in the closet, in the hallway, in the chamber. Now it echoed from inside the mirror, each knock vibrating in his skull. "No," Daniel whispered, clutching his ears. "Not again. Not again." But the sound grew louder. The glass shook with every knock, cracks spreading across its surface like a spider. His reflection leaned closer, its forehead pressing against the glass until the cracks traced across its skin like veins. Its lips moved silently. Daniel couldn't hear words, but he could feel them. They burrowed into his mind like hooks. "Let me out. Let me out. Let me out." The lights flickered. The room shuddered, and then his phone buzzed violently in his pocket. Startled, he fumbled it out. The screen lit up with a single notification. "Incoming call, room 6. His blood ran cold. He dropped the phone onto the bed as it vibrated and rang, the sound metallic and distorted, like static chewing at the edges of a familiar ringtone. The reflection smiled widened. The phone stopped ringing, and then, slowly, it began to type on its own. Letters flickered across the screen, appearing one by one. "Checkout time!" Daniel's scream tore from his throat before he realized it. He grabbed his bag, leaving the phone behind, and bolted for the door. His hand twisted the knob, thank God. It turned. He threw it open and stumbled into the hallway, but the hallway wasn't the same. It was narrower now, the walls closing in, wet with condensation that dripped down in long rivulets. The carpet squished under his shoes like soggy flesh. The buzzing lights overhead cast more shadow than illumination, and the doors, every single one, stood open just a crack, darkness yawning behind them. From each doorway, whispers leaked, not words, just hissing breaths, like countless voices waiting, watching. Daniel hugged the wall, moving quickly but carefully, trying not to look at the black gaps of the open rooms. He knew, instinctively, that if he looked too long, something would look back. But then he heard it. Footsteps. Not behind him, not ahead, to his left. He turned his head. One of the doors was opening wider, Something was stepping out. The first thing he saw was its hand pale, skeletal, fingers too long, dragging nails along the frame with a screech. Then a head emerged, tilted at the same impossible angle as the receptionist's. The face was featureless, smooth skin stretched tight, but from its mouth spilled a noise that wasn't human, a blend of laughter and weeping, rising and falling, as though two voices lived inside one throat. Daniel bolted, sprinting down the corridor, the pounding of his feet drowned out by the things crawling from the rooms behind him. The whispers rose into shrieks, doors slamming open as dozens of figures began to spill out faceless, broken, their movements jerky and wrong. He ran until the hallway twisted and turned into a staircase. He didn't care where it led down was better than here. He stumbled down the steps, his breath ragged, his chest burning. At the bottom was a door, large, wooden, rotting. It looked ancient, far older than the building itself. His fingers scrambled over the handle. It didn't budge. Locked. No, come on, he hissed, pounding his fist against it. Behind him, the staircase groaned. The faceless things were descending, their hands scraping along the walls, leaving black streaks. Desperate, Daniel reached into his pocket. His hand closed around something cold. He pulled it out, gasped. The brass key. It was back. His hand shook as he jammed it into the lock. The door clicked open with a groan, swinging wide to reveal nothing but darkness. Without hesitation, he plunged inside and slammed the door shut behind him. The world went silent. He was standing in the motel lobby again. The desk, the sofa, the lamp, everything exactly as it had been when he first arrived. The receptionist was there too, standing perfectly still behind the counter. Her smile was calm, almost warm now. "Good evening, Mr. Harris," she said softly, as though nothing had happened. "How was your stay?" Daniel's lips trembled. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but no words came. The receptionist slid the ledger forward. "Please sign here before you leave." Her voice was steady, but her eyes never blinked. Daniel looked down. The page was open, and his name was already written there in bold, black ink. The letters still glistened, wet and fresh, and beneath it, in a second line, was something that made his stomach drop. "Checked out, 3:07 a.m. He turned to the clock on the wall. The hands ticked unevenly, as always, and yet it was exactly 3:07. The receptionist leaned closer, her smile stretching just a little too wide. "Thank you for staying at Haven Inn," she whispered. "We hope you enjoyed your room." Daniel glanced back toward the hallway. There was no hallway, just a blank wall, and when he looked again at the receptionist, she was gone. Only the mirror remained.